Hello, this is Julian with Coffee Reviews, and today I'm going to be discussing the 5 things I learned after a month of drinking Scandinavian coffee. Now, a little bit of background. Obviously, I just finished the KaffeBox advent calendar for this year, and it was my first time kind of experiencing a lot of these Nordic Scandinavian coffee roasters that I had never heard of, and I just wanted to kind of give a reaction and overview of everything I had experienced and my thoughts and opinions on it overall. I have 5 points written down here, not a whole lot of notes or information, so this is just going to be kind of unscripted, laid back, a little casual, just discussion on this advent calendar overall. A little bit of background information into my own coffee journey. I have been drinking specialty coffee for a little over 10 years now. You can see in the video catalog on this channel, I've been to pretty much every major American coffee roaster. I've been to quite a few of the Canadian ones. It's safe to say I'm pretty well versed in so many of these American and Canadian coffee roasters overall. Had them so many times, kind of come up with my own thoughts and opinions on American and Canadian coffee overall. But I lack a little bit of knowledge when it comes to these Scandinavian and Nordic roasts because I just haven't had a whole lot of experience with them. A little bit of experience in Denmark, had quite a bit of La Cabra and some interesting interactions with Coffee Collective, but nothing that I would say makes me any sort of expert or more knowledgeable than anybody else about these Nordic coffees. So let's go ahead and start talking about it. I'm going to go from the least important points, what I feel, to the most important points. So starting with number 5, Kenyan coffee is still Kenyan coffee to me. And there are just a couple of Kenyan coffees included in this advent calendar, but what I found was it still kind of tasted like the typical Kenyan I had heard or experienced. Red fruit forward. Cranberries, tomatoes, pomegranates, just very acidic red fruits. And it goes beyond this. I was drinking an entire bag of Morgan coffee at Kenya before this advent calendar even started. I just didn't put up a review of it. Again, pretty red fruit forward coffee. So it's nice to know that it doesn't necessarily change based off which continent the coffee is coming from. Those Kenyans are pretty similar for the most part overall. For me anyway. And I think I'm going to leave it at that, honestly. Number 4, there's often an American equivalent to these Scandinavian coffees. And that it was never more prevalent than with Jaku. And the amount of similarities I found between Jaku and Black and White out of North Carolina was pretty interesting. Obviously, I'm talking about the Finca El Paraiso, my probably least favorite coffee from that advent calendar, but it was also my least favorite coffee of the year from Black and White. This really strong fermented fruit candy flavor was just something that didn't appeal to me, and they were very similar. And then the other coffees I had were so wild and out there, both from Black and White and from Jaku, and it was interesting to see that kind of equivalent taste and profile. You can find something with even the most out there Scandinavian coffee roasters in the United States that at least has some slight similarities. Number 3, I'm going to say Scandinavian coffee roasters are masters of the light roast, and that shouldn't come as a surprise to anybody. So many American coffee roasters try to match and mirror that very light coffee, and it has created this abundance of underdeveloped and undrinkable coffee. I'm not going to name names and point fingers at certain American coffee roasters, but there have definitely been a handful of roasters I've tried around the country that are going too light and not in a good way. You're getting these super grassy, super lemon, just underdeveloped, just undrinkable coffees. And I didn't experience a whole lot of that in this advent calendar. I was honestly expecting more coffees. There was maybe 1 or 2 that I wasn't overly happy with that mirrored that slightly. But I feel like just overall, I wasn't seeing that or experiencing that. And then number 2, my number 2 point, Scandinavian coffee as a whole is just a little bit more wild and a little bit more experimental. And I know that that's kind of a blanket term because you can look at a coffee roaster like Black and White again and say, look at what they're experimenting with. Even Onyx has done quite a few experiments, and Corvus out in Denver has had some really weird and really wild coffees that I have mixed opinions and thoughts on. However, these Scandinavian coffees, these naturals and these anaerobics, have had such bright, wild, out there flavors that have been enjoyable but at the same time aren't pushing these limits of what I would even consider cheating with coffee, like I did with that Mandarina from Corvus. It's been great. I really enjoy kind of out there different coffees. There may have been one or two that I just didn't enjoy, but for the most part, these kind of wild coffees as a whole on the spectrum, enjoyable. And that kind of leads me to wanting to try much more of these coffees. And then the number one point and the most important point I have to make about this, and this is the big one. Scandinavian coffee is objectively better, but it's not subjectively better. So let me explain that a little bit. I have a very hard time picking out any flaws I've seen in almost all 24 of these coffees. The biggest complaint and the only complaint I have about any of these coffees is that I just didn't specifically like the taste, and that's perfectly fine. You're not going to love the taste of every single coffee, but if you sat me down and said pinpoint something that's wrong with any of these coffees, I would have a hard time because I don't think many of them have any huge or major flaws in them. So many American and Canadian coffee roasters do have huge flaws. Their roast is uneven, it's too dark, it's underdeveloped, just a giant number of different issues with American coffees and Canadian coffees. And that being said, we're getting 12 of the best Scandinavian coffee roasters, so you'd expect them to have better things overall. But that being said, just kind of from this brief experience and introduction to it, this coffee is just objectively better. However, I don't think that anything from this advent calendar for me has been something that I thought was in maybe my top 5 favorite coffees I've ever had in my entire life. I feel like there have been some places in Europe that subjectively I just enjoy better, as well as some American coffee roasters that subjectively I just enjoy better. Even Tim Wendelboe, which was my runaway favorite coffee of this advent calendar, there have been some coffees that I just like better, and I feel like that's kind of going to be the impression a lot of people have. You will try these coffees side by side and say, objectively, okay, this one may have less flaws, however, I do enjoy this coffee roaster better. So those have been kind of my 5 points, but let me wrap this up basically by saying which coffee roasters I really enjoyed. And I'm kind of disappointed to say that my 2 favorites were Tim Wendelboe and Drop Coffee, because those are probably the biggest one from Oslo and the biggest one from Stockholm. So kind of upset that's the mainstream, really big coffee roasters from those 2 cities were my 2 favorites. Obviously, that washed under Skesha from Tim Wendelboe was a knockout, very, very special coffee. But 2 coffee roasters I do want to give some high praise to and some really positive reaction to was both Langora Cafe and Don Mateo Coffee. For me, both of those coffee roasters were very pleasant surprises. Don Mateo's Kenya was one of the better Kenyas I think I've ever had. And Langora Cafe, both of their coffees were probably in the top 5 overall of my favorite coffees for this entire advent calendar. So both of those coffee roasters I feel like did a very good job, and they've kind of earned themselves some name recognition with myself. If I see their coffees in places, I'm probably going to be more inclined to buy them just because of these pretty positive experiences. I'm not going to say anything negative or badmouth any of these other coffee roasters because, again, if they're just not my taste, they're just not my taste, and I'm sure others enjoyed them a little more. But I'll wrap it up at that, and those are my 5 thoughts. I would love to hear what you think about these. If you agree, disagree with my opinions on them overall, please let me know. But I'm just going to leave it at that, and these are the 5 things I learned after a month of drinking Scandinavian coffee. Thank you for watching.